But this one's special because this is the first time we have a husband-wife pair in conversation. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome to Calcutta into this series, Captain Sanjay and Tisca Chopra. So welcome. Might I request Modharima to do the formal introduction and welcome them with a traditional Bengali Uttariya.
Wow.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Shall I do it properly?
That's the offsets that show.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
I must confess I have not read Sanjay before, so I'm a bit wary of introducing him to an audience. So perhaps I might just leave it best to the person who knows it most, Tisca, to present him, bring out his thoughts, his storytelling style, his skills, his abilities, and the book itself. So over to you, Tisca.
Thank you so much, Mohan. Thank you. First of all, thank you all so much. It's getting to be hot in Calcutta and you've taken your afternoon out. Thanks to Taj Bengal, thanks to Sri Cement, thanks to Siahi, thanks to the Prabha Khaitan Foundation, Sandeep, Mohan, Madhurima, and all of you to be here and listen to us. We hope it's not just a domestic squabble that we inflict upon you and get into some kind of strange behavior, but we will try and keep it all very literary and civilized. To me, Kolkata is very special because a small part of my growing up was done here at Baliganj Circular Road. My father was the principal briefly of the APJ school on Park Street. And one thing I can say for sure that you can leave Calcutta, but Calcutta will never leave you. I had the hardest time leaving this city. It just grabbed my heart and I just couldn't leave. I was in tears. And I always feel delighted to come back here. There's such a sense of culture and such a sense of, I don't know the word for it, but there's something extremely magnetic about the literary atmosphere here. So I think we're very, very privileged today to be amongst everyone who's obviously breathed and lived that atmosphere. So I'm going to start straight away by talking to Sanjay. Sanjay, who is unusual by two accounts. First, that he's the only man who's tolerated me for 15 plus years. And also he may be the only other serving airline pilot who's written fiction in the world. So that makes him unusual. He's got an unusual story about how he started writing being a commercial pilot. We'll let him tell us more about that. So how did, tell us a little bit about the book, Sanjay.
Thanks so much. I think I'll do without the mic because my first instinct when I pick up a mic is to say, good evening ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. So I think I'll do without the mic. Yeah, it's 20 years of conditioning, it just kicks in each time you have a mic in your hand. You don't want to hear an in-flight announcement. And that actually made me sound really boring because she said you're the second airline pilot in the world who's writing fiction. It's like airline pilots know what to do with their time and they're just two of us who are locked up in their hotel rooms writing. So that doesn't sound so interesting. The book is a collection of short stories. It's 14 short stories. And I would love to describe it by saying that it belongs to a certain genre because that makes it so easy. But unfortunately not. It's a mixed bag. There's a military fiction, there's historical fiction, there's crime, there's Mughal damsels, there's the world of fighter pilots, mafia hitmen from UP. So it's very difficult to describe. I'm sure you'll enjoy it because one thing that it guarantees is that there's a spin in every tale. So that's the unique thread I think that binds all the stories together. I actually started off by writing one short story. I sent it, since I had not the first clue about publishing or anything like that. I sent it to a contest in the UK called Invisible Ink, and strangely enough, it won the first prize. And that kind of alarmed me a little bit because it showed me for that time that maybe publishing standards have fallen all over the world. And so now's the time to make my play. And so it started from there, and then this publisher in the US, he approached me and he said, he would like to publish this. So it actually got published in the US first in a different form before HarperCollins in India took it up.
And I believe HarperCollins is not the first person who published, the first publishing house that published your book. Tell me how that happened. I mean, there's another company that published your book. Is that right?
Yeah, this was a publishing house in the US. It's called Old Line Publishing. And he read this story in a magazine, and then he got in touch with me and said, "Do you have any more?" And at that time I had all of 5. And I said, "Yes, I have plenty more." So he said, "How many?" I said, "How many do you need?" And he said, 10. I said, "I have them." I had 5, and not even the bare skeleton of another 5, but I got down to it and thankfully managed to send him off 10, which he then published. And it was known, that particular collection was called Said and Done. So that's how that turned out.
It's interesting because most authors, one hears it's extremely difficult to get yourself published, and a lot of people resort to like sort of self-publication or all sorts of things. You, being a first-time author, have had 2 companies publish your book. Is it the same book? And how did HarperCollins come about?
It's yeah. Firstly, I have to say that I'm blessed, because you're right. It's the very devil to get published, especially by an A-grade house. And strange, and how fate plays out. Really strange. We were in London together one evening. We were Lord Meghnath Desai, who you all know really well. Well, I didn't know him much at that time, and so he decided to call us over for tea. And I said the only reason that we should go for that is if he can give us tea at the House of Lords, because that's something that we haven't seen. So he called us there, and I spent the most fascinating 2 hours that I've spent with anybody. He was an extremely interesting person. His knowledge about everything, including storytelling, including fiction, was excellent. So he took up these stories and he got really fascinated by them. He used to send me a critique every 2 days for each story. That's how involved he got, and I'd always be extremely thankful to him. He's actually given me a blurb on the jacket of the book, and he's the one who spoke to HarperCollins, and they called me and they said, you've been recommended by so and so. So that was quite a thing.
And then, did you have any sort of formal training in writing? I mean, being a pilot, isn't there like a lot of structure involved? I mean, it's a systems operation, being a pilot, it's like, you do things by rote. There's like something called an SOP, which is standard operating procedure. So there's an SOP. And then writing doesn't seem to have, or what one hears anyway, that there's no like great structure. So how did you shift from having a very structured job to something which is unstructured? Did that cause any sort of disturbance for you? Because 18-20 years of doing something and then shifting gears, well, how was that?
What you're saying about flying is right. It's like anything else. Flying is also about perspective. It's how you perceive a particular thing. In the sense that I know that a lot of the storytelling instinct in me comes actually as the legacy of my grandfather, who was a really avid storyteller. And I think I picked it up from him, spending all my growing formative years with him. The thing about flying is my personal experience is that there is something about being at 35,000 feet and seeing the world rotate below you. And your first instinct, and for the first time that you actually start looking, is when you start thinking that it's a string. The earth doesn't have one particular color. It's like the colors on an artist's palette have gone crazy and run. And it kind of disturbs you that there is not a single color by which you can define the world below you. Till you start looking at it another way and say that that's great, because if you're free to pick up and choose whichever color you want to define yourself and to define the world. And so that kind of freedom is great for writing, because it's great for any kind of expression. The other thing about flying is that it takes you across time zones. Time seems to flex. It's not rigid anymore. You see the sun rise when you take off from Delhi, and you think that after flying 16 hours it should be different, and you fly across so many time zones and then you land up in New York and the sun is rising again. It's a strange phenomenon. And it seems to me that is it a collaboration? This thought often came to me before I started writing, that maybe the past and the future are just collaborations to actually present the present, what we have right now. So I think I was very, that aspect of flying was really kind of inspirational.
Tell me, do any of the short stories lend themselves to film?
Actually, they do. Not all of them, I wouldn't say that, but I know that a couple of them are, because we've been approached by a few filmmakers for a couple of the stories to be converted into scripts and movie scripts and films next. So that's exciting.
Are you working on the script yourself?
On one of them, on one of them, and that's really exciting. It'd be great to see it on screen if it ever happens.
Wow. And what's up next? What do you plan to write next?
We were just before we stepped into the room, we were having a conversation where I was telling you, ma'am, that short stories, unfortunately, not doing so well now. That's what I've been led to believe by the big publishing houses. And I'm so glad that you disagreed, because it's so heartening. So my next one is a novel. It's not a collection of short stories anymore, and it's basically about this girl called Firdaus, and it's set in Kashmir. The backdrop is the problem going on, the ongoing problem in Kashmir. Firdaus is a Persian word which means heaven, and Kashmir is often referred to as Firdaus, as in there's a famous piece of Persian poetry which goes Gar Firdaus par zamina aminaston. So so it's about Firdaus, and it's very symbolic. That girl's struggle is very symbolic of the struggle of Kashmir itself and the predicament that Kashmir faces. So that's the next one, and I'm working on it right now.
So that's pretty much all that I can ask you right now, and I think we should give the audience a chance to ask anything that they would like.
Sanjay, who are some of your favorite writers?
It's a long list, but I'm fascinated by people like Stephen King, by Len Dayton, by Robert I mean, there are so many. One particular book that's really made an impact on me is The Far Pavilions, which I've read and reread many times, because I think it's really a brilliant piece of writing, where she's actually managed to get that entire world right at your doorstep. She's managed to tackle human emotions, whether they are from a military background or whether a romantic background or India of those years, and that I find very fascinating.
Faith is the bird that sings when the dawn is still dark.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But coming back to the economics of short story writing, what you publish your comments, I think you might be right, because you don't see too much contemporary short story writing in English particularly.
Right.
There's some tradition in the vernacular. Nanti Vasudevan Nair in Kerala, Shivashai in Premchand in Hindi. Today nobody does it.
Nobody.
So perhaps they were right.
It seems to be a little bit cold storage for the time being. But these things are cyclic. I believe that our tastes and our demands and everything becomes cyclic. It's actually strange, because you'd think that with the kind of time limitation people have these days, short stories would do really well.
But it's tougher to write, because you have to concise.
It's tougher. It is.
Present the whole thing in that much detail.
Yeah, it is. It is. Sorry, you were.
Hi Sanjay, I wanted to ask you, I know this is a tough one because we're talking about two loves here. So if you were given a choice to choose between the most exciting feeling, was it on the runway when you took your first maiden flight, or was it when you completed your book of short stories? So what has been, the most accelerating moment, So I know this is again, because flying, again, that will always be your first love. But then this is about pursuing a hidden passion of sorts, right? Writing. So, but then if you were to choose, what has been the most accelerating moment in your life? Was it flying when you took your first maiden flight? Or was it when you finished and you completed the book and you had that inner satisfaction that, oh, okay, I've finally written my first book, so
I'm actually very thankful that I can do both. I can actually write about the first maiden flight and then kind of get both going in the same thing. But seriously speaking, what happens is that when a thing is in the past and long in the past, you sometimes forget it doesn't have, you forget definitely you forget the nuts and bolts about it, but you also forget the emotion that it triggered at that time. not very true about flying mostly. If you ask any pilot about his first solo flight, I think that's what you're referring to. Nobody ever forgets that, because it's like it's actually coming to terms with your own inadequacy, because nobody believes when that instructor gets out of the cockpit and says, he says, you know, go. Nobody believes that they will ever come back.
All right.
Yeah, nobody believes, because firstly you're a kid. Normally you're
17, 18, 19.
18, 19, or maybe 20, or early 20s. And your thing is that you're just going by spirit and gusto, because you don't know. In fact, now that I think about it, the whole tradition of giving people a solo flight after 5, 8, 10 hours of flying seems a little strange. But the essence of flying is to give you confidence in yourself, and that's why they do it.
I think we're saying here maybe you've got time to dream when you write up.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's what I said.
Hmm.
But I don't think that's a limitation if anybody has trying to dream. I don't think that's so much. That's only how it comes to me. But I'm sure anybody anywhere,
Yes.
sitting behind a desk or anywhere is.
Well, I don't know that I agree with you there, because I think we have so many sensory interruptions in this world. And I know that you're fully focused. Well, I hope you are, because I fly a lot. But, you know, I just think you have, as you said at the beginning, you have this perspective, the melding of colours. It's an omnipotent sort of perspective. It's a different perspective on the world, really. And it also shows our infinitesimal size.
Yeah.
So maybe all of that's inspirational. So,
It
you
is.
know, when you're sitting behind a desk, you don't have that inspiration.
You don't have the perspective.
The perspective, actually, right, I'm sorry, the perspective, yeah. It's just a different perspective.
Maybe having the autopilot helps.
Absolutely. Thank God for the autopilot. Yeah, that may be true.
Yeah.
I've never really had a desk job, so I'm not kind of equipped to talk about the other part. But even so, I believe that imagination is nobody's mistress, and you know, you could be anywhere. And I think not every writer has that kind of a bird eye view of which inspires him. And there are people who come out from various professions and done, or maybe what the world would call mundane things, and then gone on to
Many bankers today.
so many bankers.
So many bankers turning authors.
Look at Amish, yeah.
Amish, Chetan.
Chetan, yeah. So it's. Or that may be something about money, as in the inspiration of the green.
Okay.
Thank you.